Trauma Therapist Podcast, episode 508. All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Rick Boone. Rick, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Guy. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Dr. Rick is the Warrior's Heart Clinical Director. He's a licensed psychologist who currently leads the clinical team at the first and only private and accredited residential treatment center in the U.S. exclusively for warriors, which includes active duty military, veterans, first responders, EMTs, and paramedics. His team helps our frontline protectors overcome drug and alcohol addiction, PTSD, mild TBI, trauma, anxiety, depression, and other co-occurring issues. All right, Rick, just a little bit about you. Before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're currently calling from now.
Yeah, Guy, I'm from Ohio, small town in southern Ohio, right on the Ohio River. Of course, my military career took me a lot of places, but now I call home Texas.
Okay, nice. So military, give us a little background into your military experience.
Right. Well, I had always wanted to be in the military. My father is a Pearl Harbor survivor. And so I remember getting into my mother's cedar chest and finding his medals and being very interested in the Navy in particular. Didn't go in that direction once I got into high school. But when I got into graduate school, I discovered, hey, guess what? There are psychologists in the Navy. And that interested me a great deal. So I looked into that. At the time, my uncle was a Navy recruiter. He helped me fill out the applications. And the next thing you know, I'm doing my internship at the National Naval Medical Center in Bethesda. Okay. And I spent the next 26 years either on active duty or in the reserves, both Army and Navy. I ended up transferring into the Army just in time for 9/11, as it turned out.
Wow. So let's kind of hear the story here. First of all, what got you into the psychology in the first place? Wanting to be a psychologist?
Great question. Again, childhood experience. I had a lot of allergies as a kid. I was in the hospital a lot. And so I gravitated, because the nurses and doctors were awfully cool and very kind. I gravitated towards healthcare. At one time, I thought I might be a physician, realized that chemistry was really not my thing. And at the time, Guy, a fellow by the name of B.F. Skinner was making headlines with his behaviorism. And I was kind of galvanized by the idea that psychology could make a difference globally. Mm-hmm. Now, I changed sort of my focus. I didn't become a behaviorist, but I was always interested in kind of helping people. Mm-hmm. And so that's why psychology seemed a natural fit for me.
So if you didn't become a behaviorist, what did you become in a sense?
Well, far more eclectic. And, I've had my romances with different theories, but probably more a relationally based psychodynamic kind of therapist.
Okay. So you get into the service, you're a psychologist. What was that like for you initially?
Well, it was awfully exciting. Believe it or not, the Navy has great opportunities for psychologists. And I had decided in graduate school I wanted to be a generalist. As you know, Guy, lots of psychologists specialize in one thing or another. But I made a conscious decision not to be a forensic or a clinical child psychologist. I wanted to do a lot of different things, and the Navy gave me that opportunity. So here I am, a small town kid from Ohio, in Washington, D.C. in uniform, and it was about the time of the movie Officer and a Gentleman. So I was living the dream. And it was a professional dream, too, because we had terrific mentors. The staff there were great. And so I was getting some great training in assessment and psychotherapy and all kinds of interesting psychological things.
Okay. More specifically, when you started working, what did you find in terms of how receptive, military personnel were to what you were doing and so forth? Because we all have, it's a pretty common knowledge about how receptive a lot of maybe more specifically combat veterans are to seeking out therapy. But what was your experience initially?
Yeah, again, terrific question, because the whole thing was an evolving process. There was a lot of resistance, particularly when you were telling commands that their people needed help, when the commands needed those people to be doing, military things. Mm-hmm. But the good news is that they recognized that the work of a soldier or a sailor is stressful, and that there are going to be issues that need to be addressed. And so as I sort of learned the military culture, I found that I was a respected part of the military community, and mental health, behavioral health increasingly became a respected part of the military medical community.
Mm-hmm. Now, was there a particular kind of subpopulation or of veterans or military individuals that you wanted to work with, that you found you could work with more easily, in a sense?
Well, Guy, the first part of my military life was peacetime military. So I was seeing people for reasons that civilian psychologists would be seeing people. It was only after I transferred into the Army and started doing combat operational stress control, which was a concept I'd never heard of. I didn't know what combat operational stress really was. But when I got into the Army and 9/11 occurred, the next thing you know, I'm working with a lot of PTSD, a lot of combat-related adjustment problems. I was in Iraq a couple of times. I was in Afghanistan once. So that really became, and then when I came back to the United States, I was working right outside of Fort Hood in Killeen, Texas, seeing a lot of veterans, a lot of active duty people. And I have a heart for the military, for those who are, offering service to their country. Mm-hmm. And so that was where my passion began to gravitate, towards those people who had the invisible wounds, if you will, of behavioral health conditions.
So how many years had you been in the service, or how many years had you been a psychologist when that started happening, when that transition happened for you?
So that was 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So I worked in the civilian world as a clinic-based psychologist at a medical clinic. So I'd had a lot of other kinds of experiences and really valued them. I loved working with medical patients. But my work with trauma really started in 2003 when I went to Iraq the first time.
Mm. And what was that like for you?
Well, so Guy, I've been asked that question a couple of times, and my answers are, it was a grind. It was difficult for me. I didn't really like being away from home, but at the same time, if someone had to be there, and I'm not exaggerating, there was an honor attached to having that opportunity, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So many questions are coming to mind now, but what are some of the challenges of working with that population? I mean, people who are, experiencing combat in and around that. As a psychologist, as a mental health professional, what are some of the challenges that you encountered? Well, we didn't have a lot of time. One of the doctrine of combat operational stress control is brevity. And so we open up these field clinics, and we might have 72, 96 hours to work with individuals who would be sent to us from different areas of Iraq. And so we were doing hardening. We were just trying to get them back in touch with the resiliency that allowed them to do the amazing work that they were doing before they came to us. And you know, for me, it was a process of discovery. Like I said, I was not thinking earlier in my military career that I would be a combat stress psychologist. But once I was there and I saw the motivation, not only of the soldiers and Marines that we were seeing in the clinic, but also the people that I was working with. These were young men and women. I won't get into the weeds about it, Guy, but one of the great revelations to me was that the Army had mental health technicians who were 19, 20, 21-year-old kids out of high school, many without college educations, and they were doing some very basic psychological interventions with the clients that we were seeing in the clinic. That's how I ended up, by the way, at the Army Medical Department Center and School a few years later. I voluntarily mobilized there because I was amazed at how much skill these young people brought to their work. And I wanted to figure out, how did they do that? It took me 8 years to get my degree. And I was still learning.
For instance, give us an example of that. Sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah, so these, if you're talking about the mental health specialists that the Army was producing, now, of course, there were Navy corpsmen who were also specialists in behavioral health, but this was the first time I'd seen anyone do it in combat. So they would run psychoeducational groups, they would do initial intakes, and then bring the information to a licensed professional like myself and say, hey, doc, this is what I think we got going on here. And then I would speak with the Marine or the soldier. And by and large, these young people were accurate in their initial assessments. Mm-hmm. They were on target. And so they were a great benefit. We could not have done it without these mental health specialists. They were really provider extenders.
You said one of your main purposes was basically to harden. So you're hardening people who are have experienced combat or witnessing it, maybe experienced trauma, PTSD. Walk us through what that looks like. Can you take us there in an example?
So I remember one soldier who was exposed to combat. And by the way, Guy, a lot of these people were experiencing home front issues also. Big stress from the home front, not being sure what's happening with spouses, with other family members. And, the communication, although it was greatly advanced from, say, Vietnam, it was still, less than ideal. So anyway, a soldier would come in and we would do an assessment. We would determine whether or not a few days of work hardening and really just a timeout from the work that they were doing militarily would be enough to get them back in the fight. And if the answer was yes, we think we can do that, we would provide them with food, hot meals that they may not have had. We would provide them with a shower that they may not have had, sleep, which was a big issue, lots of sleep deprivation issues. So we would give them some basic comforts, if you will. We would also put them to work. There were always projects around the compound that needed to be done so that they could continue to feel like they were making a contribution. And they would go through some group therapy, some process-oriented work, but some psychoeducational on, anger management or communication skills, whatever it was that they were lacking. They knew from the very beginning, and this was key, they knew that they were going back. And I'll tell you something else, Guy, this was very encouraging. most of them wanted to go back. That's kind of remarkable, but very true.
My guess is that there are some people who are listening thinking, well, what do you mean by hardening? It almost sounds antithetical to what some people might think therapy should be like. But then again, you're in a very specific situation, right? The goal is to get that person back and to complete the mission.
That's true. And this is a multidisciplinary team, by the way. So we had physical therapists, we had occupational therapists,
nice.
and they would do the sort of the occupational hardening, if you will. Folks like me were, we were doing what we do anywhere else. We were listening. We were trying to understand their experience of what was happening. We were trying to offer them some forms of support so that they would, and also communicate with the command about what was going on so that there would be realistic expectations about what that person could do when he returned.
Okay. I mean, there's so much to talk about here, but I want to get to the Warrior's Heart. How did that come about for you? And first of all, where is Warrior's Heart?
Warrior's Heart is located on a 554-acre ranch in Bandera, Texas, which is the cowboy capital of the world. And so it's a small town, which is comfortable for me. I've lived in San Antonio and Austin, and so coming to Bandera is kind of like coming home in a way. And that's the other thing. Warrior's Heart is home, if you will, for our clients. It's like coming home. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But so that's where Warrior's Heart is at. And how did I get here? It's a blessing. So I was working in private practice for about 5 years, and I was doing a lot of work with veterans and active duty soldiers primarily. When a recruiting company reached out to me and said that this position was available as clinical director. I had not heard of Warrior's Heart, even though I lived just a couple of hours away from it. Warrior's Heart is a child in terms of how old it is. It's only 5 years old. So, we're still learning and growing. And so it was great. I had a chance to interview for the position, and I don't know. Again, it's the combination of the fact that I was in the military and the fact that I do have this heart for those who serve, and the fact that, I was a clinical psychologist, and Warrior's Heart wanted a psychologist. That's part of their growth. They're looking to get, subject matter experts in every position here. So, it was a good fit, I think.
So I mentioned a little bit about it in the bio, but who comes to Warrior's Heart? Who are the clients?
Yeah, our clients, largely veterans from any branch of the service. We have some active duty, and that's a part of our client population that I think is growing as military units hear about the work that we're doing here and how it is a unique place. I mean, for one thing, we are addressing both the substance use disorder and the behavioral health disorder simultaneously, because every client gets two clinicians, a behavioral health professional and a chemical dependency specialist. And we also serve first responders, firefighters, law enforcement officers, emergency medical technicians. If you were at 9/11, if you were at ground zero on 9/11 and you were helping in the rescue efforts, you qualify as a warrior. So we treat the warrior class. It's a very specialized kind of, we don't call ourselves a rehabilitation facility. I think maybe at one time we did. We are a training program. We are training these people to recapture the greatness of the lives that they once lived, which is kind of a 12-step idea, right? We understand that, but we really emphasize it's not about stopping the drugging or the drinking, That's essential, but that's just the foundation. We want you to learn to live a great life again.
What have you seen, Rick, in terms of the trajectory of how mental health therapy is delivered to veterans, or even more specifically, this warrior class?
Well, I think you could take it from multiple perspectives. I think the field has become more sophisticated, more interested in recognizing that practically all of us, Guy, are broken in some way and have some stress or trauma-related brokenness within us. So the profession has, I think, enhanced its ability to understand that. I think the client population has become more receptive to the possibility that, it's one thing to be strong and kind of drive on and not pay attention to your feelings, but sometimes you actually will be stronger if you become vulnerable, if you talk about, painful emotions. And so I've even seen it in the last year since I've been here, a greater recognition as word gets out, there is strength through the expression of vulnerability. And warriors aren't like that. Not naturally. They're kind of hardwired to neglect that part of their experience.
And in fact, wouldn't it be true to say that, within the context of war, that would be even counterproductive? Right.
Yeah. So right. And I think that's a great point, Guy. We are really expanding their human experience. And we have one of our founders is a former special forces guy who's, he has his own great story. I won't tell his story, but I will tell you that his example has been inspiring, not only to the staff, but to many of our clients who come here and realize, I can become, I'm not losing any of my power or my strength as a human being if I admit that this was really difficult, that this really hurts, whatever the it is.
In terms of, you said you've seen things shifting a bit. There still is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there still is that stigma, right, about seeking out therapy or mental health therapy or talking to someone. How is that being addressed in the military from, the top down in a sense?
Well, we saw it recently at Fort Hood with kind of the big shakeup there, and the Secretary of the Army talking. I forget the phrase he used, but it was a fairly powerful one. We're not just complying, but we are committed. Of course, these are words, and words are wind, and we'll see how things eventuate. But I do think that, there's been a cultural shift towards a greater openness to psychological therapies. And it's sort of trickled down into the military. Now, I'm not on active duty anymore, so I can't speak for the military psychologists and psychiatrists today. They may have their own challenges, but from what I can see, commands are much more receptive to the recommendations and guidance of behavioral health professionals. And I think behavioral health professionals who come into the military, I think are more attuned to the military culture. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate because I had a dad and some other relatives who'd been in the military, so I had a little bit of a connection there. But some of my young colleagues this was back in the 1980s, they really didn't know the military very well. And so there was an adjustment period for them. Nowadays, I think that adjustment period has decreased. And there's a greater synchronicity between behavioral health and the military in general.
Awesome. So, if people want to, first of all, if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do that? And let me just reintroduce you. I'm speaking with Dr. Rick Boone. He is a clinical director at Warriors Heart in Texas. How would people go about getting in contact with you, Rick?
Who would want to get in contact with the guy?
I think after listening to this, a lot of people might be.
Well, I mean, you can reach me through Warriors Heart. And I don't have a telephone number, Guy, to offer you. My email address is rick.boone@warriorsheart.com.
Okay.
If you're looking for that kind of contact information, that would be the best way.
Okay. And in terms of, again, people who might be interested in your program, a client, any, as you call them, any warrior who is suffering from addiction and or trauma or what?
Yeah, so there are two requirements for admission to Warriors Heart. One is you have to be a member of the warrior class, and I think we've talked a little bit about what that looks like. The other is you have to have a primary diagnosis of substance use disorder. Now, I would say 95% of our clients have a co-occurring behavioral health condition. But that's not essential for admission. But you must have a substance use disorder. Those are the two requirements.
Okay. And this is a residential program?
Well, we go from detox to sober living and intensive outpatient and even telehealth nowadays.
I see.
But yes, the program that I'm most familiar with and most involved in is the residential treatment program. 42-day program, 6 weeks. Every day is different. We do lots of individual therapy. Guy, I know you would be interested in this. As I mentioned, 2 clinicians. Each of those clinicians sees their caseload twice a week. So in 6 weeks, that's 24 sessions of therapy, which is pretty good. In addition, 2 or 3 significant group therapy activities each day. And I would be remiss if I didn't add, we have some really kick-ass electives: metal shop, wood shop, canine program, equine, lots of things. And this is not just ancillary, this is essential stuff. This is great therapeutic healing.
Awesome. Now, I'm very well aware of why those are essential, but talk a little bit about that for our listeners. Why are those things essential?
Well, I think they're particularly essential for those with substance use disorder or trauma-based disorder, because these are ways of processing, sometimes unconsciously, but we work very closely with our art director to have clients find expressive modes, creative modes, even, if you will, spiritually oriented modes of expression, expressing trauma, expressing regret, and then finally expressing some acceptance that this is the life that they have. They're not going to get another. I'm a big Stoic guy. And so I say, love your life. I say that all the time. No matter what has happened, you're not going to get a different one. You can only choose to love the one you've had.
Right.
And yeah, so all of the creative arts really help clients work through the idea of loving the life that they have.
That's awesome. All right, Rick, as we wind down here, how about a go-to book recommendation, whether that's trauma related or not, or military related or not, something that or Stoic related or not? What do you have for us?
Yeah, so I have one under every category, but there's a book called The Virtues of Imperfection. And I really love that book. It's told in story form. Guy, I know you love stories. And so it sort of takes a look at some of our the world's major faith systems and tells wonderful stories about everything from discipline to love. And that's one other thing, Guy. I know that our time is just about up, but that is the core motivator of everything that happens here at Warrior's Heart. This is a loving place. I mean, we get after people, we stay on them to do the right thing and to get everything they can out of our training. But I really believe that it's the primary motivator is love.
Well, that is an awesome way to end this. Rick, man, it's been awesome having you back here. I'd love to have you back on the podcast because there's a heck of a lot to talk about. But
you name the time and date, I'm there.
All right, brother.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.